We're back on the Charles River, set for the third varsity race between Harvard and Princeton as we work our way up towards the Compton Cup. Varsity 8 race. Harvard has won 62 of the 78 all-time Compton Cups. Princeton's won 15, including last year, and MIT won 1. So it's a race that Harvard has controlled historically, but Princeton may be as deep as they've been in a long time, Dave Paretsky, and we saw that with their fourth varsity boat. Looked really solid in a 5-seat win over Harvard's 4V.
Yeah, it was a quality race by Princeton guys, and a hard-fought race in general by both crews. But yeah, I think the Princeton guys are deep and strong, and they rode well despite the conditions, and I think, stuck to their game plan, and just an indicator that it's going to be a tough bunch of racing this morning.
Well, it's as if you knew what you were talking about, because the race kind of shook out exactly how you said it would. Princeton went for that early move, built almost a full boat's lead, about an 8-seat lead, and Harvard came back, cut it to that 4 or 5-seat margin, couldn't quite finish, ran out of space at the end. If you're approaching that, knowing Princeton's going to make that early move, how do you try to respond as a Harvard boat?
You know what? I don't think you think like that when you're racing. You want to stick to your plan and hope that your boat speed is faster than theirs. I think if something happens in the first 250 where you need to make a drastic move, then you begin to change how you think about the race. But I think the guys are going to try to row their race and ideally be the first boat across the line. But and I think that's what they did in that race, and they rode their race, and you saw Princeton do what they did, that you saw Harvard focus on what they do best, and Harvard had a furious sprint, and I think they took some of it back at about 250 to go, and Princeton responded well. But that was just a tight, close race, and we should expect more of the same.
Princeton's ranked third in the country, 4-0. They beat Penn and Columbia in the Child's Cup last week, also beat Georgetown and Navy the previous week. Harvard 3-0 on the season with the win last week against Brown in the Stein Cup, beat Cornell and George Washington in Ithaca a couple weeks back. Here are your lineups for the third varsity boats. First for Harvard, the coxswain is freshman Jennifer Coons, sophomore Dom Glover in the stroke seat, junior Phil Bates in seat 7, sophomore Ryan Rasmussen in seat number 6. Pat Dowling's a senior, he's in seat 5, freshman David Fleming in seat 4, sophomore Ben Strathmore in seat 3, sophomore Curtis McLeod in seat number 2, and the bow is senior James Green. So a couple Harvard seniors, you saw a freshman in that boat, and 3 sophomores for the Crimson in their third varsity boat.
Yep, it's good depth, good to see a good mix of guys. I've been talking to Pat and Billy. They're excited about these guys. They're strong, they row well, and you've got a lot of experience in this crew too. And generally in the lower boats, if you have a lot of experience, you're going to see some really gritty racing and some really, really aggressive racing. But I think everyone's getting used to the fact that freshmen are integrated and how we should think about each of these boat classes. It can be a bit more of a toss-up, harder to predict which boat or class of boats is going to be better. But good. It should be good. Should be good racing.
Meanwhile, Princeton's a very young boat. Freshman Matt Wiley's the coxswain. Sophomore Augustin Wombersee is in the stroke seat. Sophomore Leo Tosh is in seat 7. Freshman Ralph Elsgood in seat 6. Sophomore Jan Bernhard in seat number 5. Seat 4, sophomore Jonathan Lord. Seat 3, freshman Charles Watt. Seat 2, freshman James Palmer. Seat 1, the bow seat, is a senior Greg Stein, as we are off and running right out of the chute.
I got Harvard at 43. Princeton at 43, so we're tight. Looks like Princeton's edged out to a little bit of an early lead. Very aggressive start for them, very clean as well.
Tigers at the bottom of your picture, Harvard up at the top, and Princeton again out with a quick early lead here over this Harvard 3V boat.
Princeton settled now to 38.
This is a boat of the future for Princeton. Mentioned that starting lineup in this third varsity boat with 7 of the 8 seats occupied by either freshmen or sophomores for the Tigers.
Yeah, and just given their relative experience, it can be, you can vary what you get here. So it looks like they have been extremely aggressive in this first 500, and they're rowing very long. So, I'd pick that 6 seats now over the Harvard crew, which is not good. But we talked about responding if the race goes a certain way, and I think you may see that with the Harvard guys. It looks like they're edging back a little bit, which is good.
Maybe a little earlier move than normal for Harvard as the Crimson try to respond past 500 meters in.
Yeah, you got to make something happen. You can't get dusted like this. So, but I think the Princeton guys have settled now a bit more. You got a lot of young guys in that boat that are excited, and frankly, I think over the last 10 strokes we've seen Harvard take a couple seats back. So
that hot start for the Tigers, similar to what we saw in the 4V race. Harvard came back to within 5 seats in that first race today. See if they can come back even further here.
I've got Princeton at 34 now, which I think is a little low. They've settled kind of low.
A lot of freshmen and sophomores. See what they have in the tank here at the end of this long race. Just the one senior out in that bow seat for the Tigers trying to captain the ship. They do have a good lead over Harvard, though. Still looks like it's 7 or 8 seats.
Yeah, I would agree. I got Princeton or Harvard at 36. Yeah, it looks like Princeton, despite the lower rating, has pushed out a little bit.
Looks like they've responded to the minor Harvard move as we approach the halfway point. Princeton heading towards the bridge and now starting to think about open water at about 2:42 through the first 1,000.
Yeah, and you'll see, given the tailwind, we're going to see fast times this morning. So I would expect to be in that ballpark. And you can see Princeton now has open water, which is unfortunate.
Tigers take it underneath the bridge. We'll see what type of response this Harvard 3V has left. Once you have that open water, if you're in that position that Harvard is right now, it comes down to a matter of pride and grit, right, to try and work your way back into it.
I think that, and I think to overcome a margin like that, given where we are in the race, you got to, as a crew, decide you want to change it, and it's not a polite move. So I don't. At the moment, it looks like Harvard is trying to make a move. They look strong and together. The Princeton crew is just sort of banging on it, though. Yeah, it looks like they've pushed their lead out a little bit more.
Princeton just very steady. Once they got that lead, they kind of locked into a nice rhythm. You mentioned it. It seemed like maybe a lower stroke rate, but nice, strong, in-rhythm strokes, and they've continued to push forward.
Yeah, and then the deeper we get into the race, the more the Harvard guys are going to hurt, and the more the Princeton guys are going to feel good, given the lead.
They can look back and see that lead grow more and more if you're wearing white right now. 4:08 to go, about 500 meters remain. So, about a 5-minute, 40-second pace or so for the Tigers 3V boat?
That's quick. It's quick. And they keep moving. The Princeton guys look good.
Now, this was a Tigers group that was very motivated making the trip up to the Charles. They talked a lot about how they're embracing the fact that Princeton's only won one Compton Cup on the Charles in the last 60 years. It happened 10 years ago, and that team is having a reunion here on the Charles today, so they were hoping to do something for those guys who won 10 years ago. And so far, a locked-in start for the Tigers at both the 4V and the 3V.
Yep.
Still plenty of time for Harvard to turn it around in the JV and varsity races, which are coming up next. But Princeton on its way home in the final 250 meters here at 3V, and they've had open water since about the midway point.
Yeah, this is a resounding margin right now. As long as nothing crazy happens, they should take this one home. This is a big one.
We've raced about 5 minutes and 20 seconds. Tigers have a few more strokes left in him. Crimson will try to bring it on home.
So I can just look for the flag.
Come towards the flag. Unofficially, Princeton right about 5:40 as they work it home. Tigers are crossing about 5:47 unofficially. And now here's Harvard finishing things off.
9-second margin.
That's a big win in 3V for Princeton.
Yeah, that's a dominant win.
And it started, as you saw, pretty close to off the opening strokes there.
Yeah, no, Princeton looked good. It it was closed through the first 250, and it just sort of looked like Princeton had a more powerful, faster settle, and they sort of took inches every stroke, which is what you want to do.
Well, Tigers rolling early. They've won the 4V and the 3V. Harvard will look to turn things around with the JV and varsity races coming up next on the Ivy League Digital Network.